Hey, I'm Jake, and today I'm drawing this picture of the Little Mermaid as a robot, and I'm talking about exposure. Okay, before I get into today's video, I just want to say, holy cow, the comments on the talent video that I did last week were just through the roof. How many people commented, I don't know, I lost track, but the discussion going on there was, I think, incredible. So many different points of views being shared, lots of disagreement, but I think it was civil, strong points of view. I tried my best to respond to as many comments as I could for the first day. But I really liked the discussion that was happening about talent and whether or not it even exists and what it actually is. So I appreciate it. You guys are awesome. I really like that discussion that happened there. Other things. My book, Drawings 2, I just packed up the first batch that's going to go out next week. And when I say I just packed up, I mean 6 or 7 students from BYU and UVU came over and helped pack up, and it was just a great experience meeting with these people and talking with them while we worked on packing the books. All right, so today we are packing up drawings books. I got 5-6 people here all doing the packaging. Let's go check them out. They did like 700 of them in 3.5 hours. That's impressive. They did a good job, and I really appreciate those guys helping out. There's still copies left of Drawings 3, so if you want a copy, order one in my shop, and I just send them out once a week, every week. So it's a good book. Check it out. Lastly, I'm on Snapchat, and I'm posting behind-the-scenes stuff, like as I work on things and things I'm thinking about. So if you want to follow me on Snapchat, the Snapchat code is right here. Snap it with your phone and then add me. These things are making noise. Okay, that's it. Let's get into the drawing. Okay, so what I'm working on here is this is Ariel as a robot, and this is a design challenge I've been giving myself where I try to reimagine Disney characters as robots, and it offers up these I don't know, these fun design problems. How do you maintain the iconic look of the character but still translate it into machine parts and robot parts and have it be this robot that is recognizable as the Disney character? It's been a lot of fun, and I've really liked doing these. You could see here on the left side of the page, I had my first pass at Ariel, and I did this dynamic sideways or profile view of her swimming with the robot flounder, and while I liked it, I felt like it didn't showcase the character that well, showcase the design, so I went with more of a forward-facing pose where she's facing the viewer and looking past or looking through the viewer, and I think this highlights the design elements of her that are most iconic. So I'm just going to keep working on this, but what I wanted to talk about today is exposure, and specifically answering the question, is exposure fair compensation for an artist's work? And I think that's a question that is being talked about a lot, you know, and it actually arose while we were packing books the other day. I was talking with the students, and they talked about, you know, is it fair to only pay an artist in exposure? And we got into the discussion a little bit, and I've been thinking a lot about it. So I wanted to tackle this today, and my answer to that question, you know, is that fair compensation? My answer is, it depends. It really depends. There's a great article by Greg Ruth on the Muddy Colors blog. You should check it out. And what he says is there's the 4 pillars of art currency, and these are the reasons that any artist takes on a job or decides to work on a project. And the four pillars are love, relationships, money, and publicity. Okay, the reason you decide to take on any assignment is because of one or all of these things. They each offer some value. All right, so for love, if you're doing the job because of love, it's because you love the work just for the sake of doing it. It's either a property that you're working on that you grew up with and you love it and you want to give back to this thing that's inspired you so much. That's one reason. Or you just love the craft of making art, and so just for the sake of making it, that's why you do it. So that's one reason you might take on a project, is because of the love to do it. Another reason is relationships. Okay, you take on a job as a way to either establish or solidify a relationship with a client or a publisher or an editor or an art director, and I've done jobs like that. It's the most important value that I'm getting from this job is to establish this relationship. It's sort of like a first date, and it's showing them, hey, I do good work, and this is what you can expect from me, and let's form this relationship and have it turn into something bigger. The third one is money. This is obvious. This is easy. This job pays a certain amount. You need that certain amount of money to pay bills, and you take the job because it pays well. And then lastly is publicity, and this is where you do the job because of the opportunity it gives to spread the word of your work, to spread that around, to show people, look at what this person can do. And all of these are valid reasons to take on work, to do a job. This last one, publicity or exposure, this is one thing that especially young artists really value and really need. They need people to see their work, and even as a seasoned artist, there's still new markets and new people that you want to break into, markets you want to break into, people you want to be exposed to. And so exposure really is something that an artist needs and may sometimes even struggle with throughout their career. So I want to talk about exposure, what it is, and specifically what it is not. Okay, so first things first, 1,000 people seeing your work is not exposure. All right. However, 1,000 people seeing your work and knowing you created it, that is exposure, and that's the difference. Okay. If a person's offering you a job that may not pay well, but your work will be seen all over, but that work is not attributed to anyone, it's not attributed to you, that's not exposure, and that's not fair compensation. And there are people who prey on, these vultures that prey on artists offering exposure. Your work's going to be seen by a lot of people. If you're not attributed to that work, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if 1,000 or 1,000,000 people see it if they don't know that you did it. And so that isn't fair compensation. So on the flip side, if 1,000 people are going to see your work and they know that you created it, then I think that's fair, because it can be attributed to you and you're known as the artist who did that thing. Okay, I want to talk about my work that I've done throughout my career, and the different levels of exposure and what kinds of exposure that I got from the work. So I worked for several years in animated films, and this, for a long time growing up, I thought this is the pinnacle. This is it. To work on an animated film is the thing that you strive for, and I remember wanting to climb that mountain and finally climbing it, and worked for couple of years on this film and just put my heart into it, and watching it on the big screen, waiting for the credits to roll, and there seeing art department, and in the middle of the art department, Jake Parker, there's his name, my name on the big screen, and that was super gratifying. It was awesome. However, let me ask you this: how often have you sat in the movie theater and looked at all the credits to roll by? I still do it, and I do it to see if there's anybody I know, because I've worked in the industry for a long time. I do it for animated films, and I like to just see, oh, who's in what art department, who worked on this, and do I recognize that name. But your average moviegoer hops up and leaves the theater as soon as those credits start rolling. So is your name on the big screen at the end of a film really exposure? It's not huge. It's more like a special thanks. Really, your compensation for working on that film is the salary you got for the 2 years that you worked there. And as I worked in animation, my salary was great. It was fine. It was a six-figure salary that I could support a family on and pay rent and have a car and all that kind of stuff. And that's where the true compensation, I think, was for the work that I was doing. It was nice to have my name on the film, but it wasn't exposure. Okay, I've worked on several commercials over the years. I've worked for Hasbro, doing G.I. Joe commercials, My Little Pony commercials. I've done commercials for all kinds of different big brands, doing concept art and storyboards and things like that. And these commercials have been seen by millions of people. I remember working a commercial one week, and a couple weeks later seeing it on Saturday morning cartoons. That's not still a thing, but it was a thing at one time, and commercials played in between cartoons, and thinking, oh, I worked on that. Everybody's seeing my work, but at the end of the commercial it doesn't say, concept art by Jake Parker. Is not exposure, even though millions of people have seen designs that I've done. No, I was being paid for working on that commercial, and my compensation was the paycheck that I got to work on that commercial. I've also done illustration for various magazines and books, and that's a higher level of exposure, because typically when you do an illustration, whether it's a book cover or an interior illustration or spot illustration, it's attributed to the artist. It'll say illustration by so-and-so. However, that attribution is usually in very fine print, either in the corner of the page or in the gutter of the page, and it's not something, blaring like, hey, look who illustrated this. You really do have to hunt it out, and especially for a book cover, it doesn't say book written by so-and-so, cover illustrated by this artist. You usually have to flip the book on the back and look down at the very bottom next to the barcode, and it'll say book designed by so-and-so, illustration by so-and-so. So while the attribution there, it's not, it's not this awesome type of exposure where people are directly linking that illustration to your name. Typically, when you see an illustration, it's garnish for either the article or for the for the book itself, and people are paying attention more to who wrote the article and who wrote the book. And so those are, I would say, on the illustration end, it's lower level exposure, but definitely on the animation and on the commercial side of things, that's not really exposure. Now, on the flip side, and on all those things, I'll say I did get paid well. I'm fine with the money that I got. On the flip side, though, I've done lots of things for big exposure and not very much money. Early in my career, I worked on a couple of several comic anthologies, the Flight anthology books, and these were collections of short stories, short comic stories written and drawn by individual artists, all combined together into one book. And the stories were, I guess, thematically the same, or they all just had the sort of the same vibe and the same feel, even though they were different characters and different stories and different themes, and they were really cool. And these books did not make the artists a lot of money. At least I didn't see a lot of money from these stories that I wrote. They would take me a month, maybe 2 months of working on them at night after my job, and really just drawing and coming up with the story and the idea and executing it and making these beautiful, as beautiful as I could make, story pages. And the monetary compensation I got from them was not equivalent to the amount of time that I got to them. But these stories all ended up in a book or several books that were published by a major publisher. It was Random House. At first it was Image Comics, and then it was Random House, and these books ended up in every Barnes and Noble, and they were seen by a lot of people, and people would read this story, and it would say at the beginning of the story, Robot and Sparrow, or Hugo Earhart, written or drawn by Jake Parker. It was known that Jake Parker made this story, and that was good high exposure, even though I wasn't getting paid very much money for them. Another form of exposure where I don't get paid at all is social media. I've worked really hard at building my social media presence by posting a lot and trying to post engaging content and posting consistently, and consequently my work has been seen by a lot of people, and on every post it says Jake Parker posted this. My name is right there beside it. That's high exposure. I haven't gotten paid at all for any social media posts that I've done. I've also done comic book work for Rocket Raccoon, and even my own comics for graphics. And on the book cover it says Jake Parker. On the cover of Rocket Raccoon it has the last names of all the creators, and there right next to Scotty Young is my name, Parker, right there on the cover of the book. That is really good exposure. People know, oh, who's the artist for this? This is Jake Parker. And then children's books. On the cover of every children's book, on the title page, it says written by, illustrated by. The illustrations are a major part of a children's book, and that is good exposure. What's nice about comics and picture books is they can eventually you get to a point where they do pay really well. But early on, the comics work that I did and the children's book work that I did didn't pay as good as it pays now. Okay, several years ago I created a goal for myself, and this is the goal that you have to come up with your own goal of what you want to do with your work and what you want to get out of your life's work, your career, right? And this goal that I set for myself was to build a catalog of work that was directly associated with either my name or my brand, the style of work that I do. And I realized that that as I was working on these animated films and working on commercials and getting concept art jobs, these were all jobs that, though they paid me, they didn't get me closer to this goal of having this body of work associated directly with my name. And so I had to make a choice, and in 2015 I really put my foot down on this choice, and that was, and I had been trending toward this, but that was only taking on work and only doing jobs that that I was directly attributed for the work. So when somebody saw that work that was done, they knew that Jake Parker did it. And so that meant saying no to concept artwork for a commercial or for an advertisement where they needed me to do a concept art, and then it would be executed by another team of computer modelers and renderers and things like that. It meant saying no to that stuff, because in the end, even though millions of people or thousands of people would see either this commercial or this magazine advertisement, they wouldn't know that I created it. Only the people who hired me really knew that not even the client would know that I created it. They would just know that that is artwork being made for them. And so that meant saying no to work like that and saying yes to more projects, whether of my own creation or projects that showcase my work, like doing more children's books or doing more comics work, things that had my name on the cover of the work, or I was directly associated to it. And so in doing that, in doing this choice, it really was reflected on looking back at all the work that I'd done in my career. And as I look back and I saw that, okay, I'm getting these jobs that pay really well, but nobody knows I did it, versus I want to get more jobs that are directly associated with my name, and even though they don't pay less, they do go to building this catalog and building that, getting me closer to this goal. I want to tell a story about the flight books, right? So I did these flight book stories, and I think it was 4 different volumes I was in. And what happened there was, they were getting reviewed, and people were kind of looking at the flight stories and saying these are really good, and more people were buying them, and which stories are the best in it. And what happened was the editor of the books, Kazu Kibuishi, who really got everybody together to do these books, he was picked up by a literary agent. She wanted to represent him, and they started working together, and it was their goal to get him to do graphic novels and to really go into where he's at now, which is the series of Amulet books, which the 7th just came out. You should check them out. They're really cool. And as she was working with him, she asked him who else could she work with? Who does he know from these flight books that that she could work with? And he showed her my flight stories, and pretty soon she was contacting me, and a relationship was formed, and she became my literary agent, and that's how I got an agent who then went on to represent me and to get me a graphic novel series at Scholastic, which my Missile Mouse books were directly because of Scholastic seeing my work in flight, and B, me having a literary agent that could negotiate that deal and really get it into a good place. That also led to me going into the publishing world and getting into children's books, illustrating children's books as well, because of the work that they saw me doing in these flight comics and in a couple of other anthologies that I did. Because of seeing that work, which didn't pay very well, but it was good exposure, they were able to see, oh, this artist can execute, he can do a really good job. Let's hire him to do these children's books. And now I've been doing children's books for 6 years, I think, and I'm working on books 7 and 8 right now. My 6th one is coming out later in the year, and so this has really led to a big part of my career just from doing these earlier jobs that didn't pay well but had high exposure. Okay, I worry that some artists get offended by the exposure card. Hey, will you do this job? I can't quite pay you what it's worth, but it's good exposure. And I worry artists get offended by that because they expect really decent and fair pay, but they look past really what the compensation of exposure can do for them. So I just ask that people look at each offer closely and see where the real payoff could be. Yeah, it may not pay very well, but the exposure could actually be good. And the way that you can judge that is, how is your name attached to that project? Is your name going to be directly associated with it, or are you just a faceless artist creating work for, to help promote this thing? That's where you got to draw the line. That's where you got to find it out. All right. I want to talk about taking exposure into your own hands. Okay. A lot of this I'm talking about relying on other entities coming to you and helping you and publishing you and working with you. But we live in an age where there's so many tools given to artists that really we can take this stuff into our own hands, and we can actually have control and power ourselves. So these are 5 things you must do to rise above the noise. There's a lot of noise out there, and be seen among other people, to really be noticed. Okay. Now these 5 things. This is assuming first, before I get into 5 things, this is assuming that you've already established your own style, and that you have a growing body of work that you're actively like contributing to. Okay, so if you haven't done that, if you don't have a style, you don't have a body of work, go do that first, and then you can come back to this taking exposure into your own hands thing. Okay, so okay, you've got your style, you've got a growing body of work, stuff that you're adding to every month, you're adding artwork to it, whatever. First thing I want you to do, if you haven't done this yet, is get a professional looking website. All right, you need to have a landing page where when people are doing a search for you, they have somewhere to go, somewhere to land. All right, I use verb.com to build my website. It's super easy, it's really intuitive. You can go to my website and check it out. Verb is great. Other websites like Squarespace are also easy ways to build a website. I don't want you to build a Blogspot website. I don't want you to do a Tumblr website. I want you to have a website that you can really control and that you own the domain to. All right, that's something that you can hang on to and you're going to want over the years. All right, so get a professional website. Some of you have already done that. Great. Let's move on to number 2. Build a social media presence. All right, you got to be on Facebook. You got to be on Instagram. Even though I think Tumblr's on its way out, you got to be on Tumblr and you got to be on Twitter. This is where people are regularly checking and consuming content and looking for artists, and you want to be where people are looking. So post your work regularly on these sites. Okay, now number 3, assuming you've done number 1 and number 2, number 3 is, and this is kind of a hard part, you have to make something extraordinary. Every day we're seeing stuff that, though it's cool and it may have been cool years ago, it's becoming more ordinary and commonplace now. You have to do something that's different, something that's extraordinary, that's not ordinary. Okay, I have some ideas for that. You've seen my video, maybe you haven't, but go look at my video, Design 100 Somethings. I guarantee if you do that, you do 100 somethings, people are going to stop and take a look at that. And you say, look, here, I designed 100 motorboats. I don't know. I designed 100, my thing was 100 robots. I designed, 100 book covers. People are going to stop and look at that. That's something extraordinary. Another thing you do is do your version. You saw my video on fan art. Do your version of an existing IP. I saw someone did the new Star Wars movie Force Awakens as samurai. All the characters as samurai. That was posted on all these blogs everywhere, and it was really cool to see this thing that someone did. Their version of Star Wars. I saw another guy who's doing Star Wars as Calvin and Hobbes, and that's getting a lot of exposure to him. The thing I've been doing recently, the thing I'm drawing now, is Disney characters as robots, and if I do several of these, if I do 10 of these or 20 of these, that's something people are actually going to stop and take a look at. I want to see all the Disney characters as robots. That's something they'll want to pass and share with friends. Another thing is write a story that fills the gaps in some sort of existing IP. Okay, artist named Tyson Murphy wrote a story about Chewbacca growing up with Kylo Ren or Ben Solo before he became Kylo Ren, and how he couldn't, he formed this bond with Ben Solo, and he couldn't kill him at the end. He just grazed him, or he just wounded him, because he still saw him as the kid he grew up with, and that was shared everywhere, and people were like, look at this, I never really thought about Chewbacca's relationship to him. It was something that really struck a chord with fans and helped them to see Star Wars in a little bit different light, and it got Tyson a lot of exposure. Another thing you do is write a really good either biographical story about someone else or an autobiographical story about yourself. Make sure it has a moral. Make sure it has a unique point of view. I think about the website Zen Pencils, and what this guy does is takes really famous quotes by people, influential people, and he turns them into a comic. That's really neat. Anthony Holden, he does these really cool family comics about his own life and his own experience with his kids. And those are really, really well done, really, really popular and shareable because people can relate to them. Lastly, take on art challenges like Inktober or this March of Robots, and really do something spectacular with it, like get a theme going. And I've just seen different people do Inktober and turn it into a project that really resonates and is something different. When you do the Inktober project or the March of Robots or any of these other drawing challenges, there's a lot of eyes on these projects, on these challenges, and people are looking for them and wanting to see who else is doing them. And so it's a way to draw attention to you. A book just recently came out called Movie Title Typos. It's a guy who would take one letter out of movie titles and completely change the meaning of them, and he did an illustration for each of them. And what this started out as was his Inktober project, and it turned into a book deal because people saw this Inktober project that he did, and it got shared, and it was all this kind of crazy exposure that then turned into a book deal and possibly future work for him. Okay, so those are 5 ideas that you could do for just making something extraordinary. Okay, and that was, so we said get a website, build a social media presence, make something extraordinary. Number 4, take that thing that you made and submit your thing to every top blog. They're all thirsty, they're hungry for content. And if you show up and say, hey, look at this thing I did, a handful of them might even want to share it and talk about it and post it on their blog. Make sure you write an article for your project as well, because they don't want to take the time to write their own article. If you already have it there, it makes it that much easier for them to post the project that you're doing. And by getting a top blog to share your work, it's getting your work in front of a lot of people, a lot more people than you would have access to on your own social media platform. You could also try posting it to Reddit. Things have blown up on Reddit. Things that are really unique and refreshing have really gotten a lot of exposure on there. I know Tyson Murphy posted his Chewbacca Kylo Ren comic on Reddit, and it got a lot of exposure there. Okay, number 5. This is really the hard part. You got to do it again and again and again. You have to be consistent. A lot of times it's not the first one, it's not the second one, it's the third extraordinary thing that you've created that really gets people like noticing and looking at what you're doing. Okay, so those are the 5 things. In short, exposure only counts if your name is next to your work in big fat letters. Anything other than that isn't really true exposure, and you should look at the real reasons for why you're doing it. All right, that's my thoughts on exposure. I would love to hear what you think about it as well. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on getting paid in exposure, your thoughts on how to get more exposure for your work and what you're doing. I'd love to hear all of that. If you have not subscribed to my videos yet, what are you waiting for? It's all this kind of stuff. If you like this kind of stuff, I'm just going to do more of it. I'm going to share more about my thoughts on art and creativity and what I'm doing and the projects I'm working on. If you like that, please subscribe. Those of you that have already subscribed, thank you. You guys are awesome. I'd love it if you shared this video with others and just brought other people to this and showed them what's going on over here. That'd be really cool. Sorry I couldn't get a video out last week. I worked hard on getting all the books shipped. I wanted to post this video last Friday, and it just did not happen, so it's happening Monday morning. I will try to do better next time. All right, see you guys later. Have a great week, and go make something awesome.